A look back at the 2018 Florida legislative session. We're joined by members of the local Northwest Florida legislative delegation, and they want to hear from you. We are live and interactive on radio and on television. From the Phyllis and Mike Johnson studio, it's Legislative Review, Dialogue with a Delegation.
This original WSRE presentation is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Jeff Weeks. In addition to our television broadcast on WSRE TV, we're also being heard on News Radio 1620 and 92.3 FM. The stage was set for the 2018 Florida legislative session to be compelling. It was Governor Scott's final session, his eyes likely on a U.S. Senate seat. Speaker Corcoran, who is expected to run for governor, was unlikely to make all of Governor Scott's budget dreams come true. And sexual harassment accusations had rocked Tallahassee. Then, on Valentine's Day, the dynamic changed. The mass shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, forced the issue of gun control right into the hands of the Florida legislature. And with the entire nation watching, lawmakers were compelled to enact legislation. A bill was passed and signed into law. We'll discuss the details of that law later in the program. On this evening's program, we want to hear from you. This is an opportunity for you to ask your legislators questions about issues that most concern or interest you. You can do so by email or phone. The email address is questions@wsre.org. Or if you prefer, call us at 850-484-1223 or toll free at 1-800-239-WSRE. We're joined by members of the Northwest Florida Legislative Delegation. Senator Doug Broxson serves District 1. He is Vice Chair of the Committee on Military and Veterans Affairs, Space, and Domestic Security. Senator George Gaynor serves District 2. He is Chair of the Committee on Transportation and was unable to join us this evening. From the Florida House of Representatives, Representative Clay Ingram. He serves District 1 and is Chair of the Transportation and Tourism Appropriations Subcommittee. Representative Frank White is Vice Chair of Health Innovation Subcommittee and serves District 2. He was unable to join us this evening as well. J.R. Williamson serves District 3. Representative Williamson is Vice Chair of the Government Accountability Committee. Representative Mel Ponder serves House District 4. He is Vice Chair of the Higher Education Appropriations Subcommittee. Gentlemen, welcome and thank you so very much for joining us. Well, Representative Ingram, I'm going to begin with you since this is your last rodeo, shall we say. Your term limited out after serving in the House. So tell me, what was the year like for you?
Yeah, a little probably reflective in nature. Knowing that I've come to the end of my 8-year term. Looking back, I think back to what I thought success would look like in this process, and it was a freer state. Less laws in the books. Less regulation and a lower tax burden on people in the state of Florida. And looking at it through that lens, hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars in taxes cut, over 4,000 regulations cut. Those are often needless but costly to business people. And so we're in such a better state economically than we were back in 2010 when we were elected. So, I hope these guys will continue that legacy and continue to make the state freer and better off.
I always like to begin the program just by getting each of you to go around and sort of give me a high point of this session, the 2018 session. So I'll go ahead and begin with you.
You alluded to this in the opening, but we ended the session with a very tough, emotional vote, and I know we'll get to that later. But overall, this was probably going to be a non-controversial session. We passed a budget, a good budget, and we were going to get things done and go back to our districts. Things didn't end up that way. Well, I'll say this: other than the very end of session, the session was going that way, and it was, we funded some things that are necessary to the state. The economic development and tourism budget, transportation budget, all fully funded. Representative Ponder and in the education realm, we ended up well funded there. Higher ed, did well, and so it ended up in a good spot overall, and did well at home too. I think that's very important that minus a few projects that were vetoed. The Beulah interchange, was strangely vetoed. But, other than that, we did pretty well for home too. And I'm proud that we were able to bring resources home, which is not always easy for us because there's just a handful of us in the central time zone. So we have to work probably 3 times as hard as everyone else to bring resources home. But I'm proud to have worked with these guys to have done that.
But we almost did not stay in the central time zone.
Right.
We'll talk about that later. Senator Broxson, give me your high point of the session.
Well, there's no question that the tragedy that happened in Parkland capped everything. We thought, and we've been a very kind of united, we're Democratic Republicans, but when that event happened, we found out how divided we really are as a state. We had thousands of people come to Tallahassee to protest many different issues, and it was very uncomfortable. And we know even now the wave of that has carried through. I do think we had to respond. We did respond and send a message back that we were going to have a safer school system, and we funded that with almost $500 million. And it said to all the parents out there that we care about your kids, because not only are we parents and grandparents, but we believe that a person that goes to school in the morning should come home safe in the afternoon. And we're committed to doing that. And I think you saw that's what happened at the end of the session.
Representative Williamson?
Sure. We started out the session thinking that it was all going to be all about a hurricane, and,
right.
and that was really the thought process, that everything we did would be dictated from the storm and the recovery from the hurricane, and then everything changed on Valentine's Day, obviously. The session, I think overall, like Representative Ingram and Senator Broxson said, we had a lot of good things. We brought some things home, which is always good. From a personal standpoint, I was able to serve as Vice Chairman of Government Accountability, and had a great chairman in Chairman Matt Caldwell, who let me really put my hands into things and really work with him to help with agendas and kind of learn how the chairman's role becomes. So from a personal standpoint, I think it was a great session to really dive in, to learn the process from that end, to where I can make myself more valuable for the future, for the future Speaker of the House, and that makes me more valuable for the people that I represent, and more valuable for this delegation as we move forward. So it was a good year overall, though. I think we're going to have things we're going to talk about tonight where we agreed on it, and there's going to be some things we disagreed on, but overall I think we did well for the Panhandle.
Representative Ponder?
Yeah, it was just an incredible honor to be over there and represent. How I kind of look at it is not just District 4 that elected me, but also the honor to work with these fine gentlemen here as representing a region. There's other parts of the state that are phenomenal of who they are, but Northwest Florida is pretty unique. And so as they've all indicated, the world kind of changed Valentine's Day this year, and session took a turn. And beyond all that, I want to always continue to learn and grow and blossom as much as I can in order to best benefit the constituents that elected me, and also make a difference for the region. And so, like Mr. Williamson talked about, is having the honor serve as Vice Chair of the Higher Education Appropriations Subcommittee was a great honor for me. Serving under Chairman Ahern, I was able to learn a lot of universities, colleges, tech schools, trade schools, etc. And so that was a great blessing for me, because here in Northwest Florida, we have an amazing K-12 system, which is phenomenal, but our higher ed with UWF, Pensacola State, Northwest Florida State College, all within our footprints, how can we continue to grow and honor them, the call and significance upon them? How can they in turn make a difference to the students that go there, and ultimately to the region that they're called to serve? And so for me, it was a great learning experience from that standpoint. We were able to bring some funds back, as has been addressed, and so that's always a good thing. But from a policy perspective, with our military, highlighting a few things for them this year that I had the great honor and privilege to run was a great benefit, because they affect all of Northwest Florida. And so from that regard, it was a very successful session, and as Mr. Williamson talked about, it hopefully will help further a foundation that we stand upon to help benefit the region going further.
We have a lot of questions from viewers and listeners tonight, and we are going to get to those, many of them about guns. But let me just begin, and I'll begin with you, Senator Broxson. Just sort of give us the 10,000-foot overview of the gun control, or the gun bill that was passed.
Well, what I think all of us fought to make sure that we separated the two issues and vote separately on those two issues. It did not happen. Ended up being a school safety, where we're going to have, we've historically, every school in Florida has been a gun-free zone. That changed. Now it's up to the 67 superintendent of schools to put together their own program to decide exactly how they want to do that. That was the big issue. One of the things that was so offensive to many of us that are gun control advocates is that there was a tendency nationwide and worldwide to blame that incident on one person and say it's because of guns. That's not true. 99% of people that own guns, possess guns, are law-abiding citizens. The issue that we have primarily in the Senate is we're a changing Senate. We had over 100 amendments that would have made Florida no longer a Second Amendment state. They would do everything from abandon every type of a weapon, not just what they call assault weapons. And that was egregious. We knew we had to send something back to the people of South Florida that would not be overbearing, but would be a message that we are sensitive to the issues that happened in South Florida. Otherwise, the Senate, frankly, would have flipped. They would have gone to a Democratic-controlled Senate. And all those 100 amendments we looked at that we found so offensive would be back on the dais next year. And it was very important to participate in sending a message that the Senate would take a responsible position.
Any other gentlemen like to add to that at this stage in the game? Okay. Well, you kind of gave us the overview there, so let me get to some of the questions that our viewers and listeners have sent in, and this will be open for everyone. So here we go. Do you believe that the number of assault weapons currently owned by non-military public has influenced the number of gun-related deaths within the past year? If not, please explain your reasoning. If so, explain your reasoning. So I'll open that up to everyone. So the question is, do you believe assault weapons are directly tied to the number of gun deaths within the past year? Go ahead.
Sure, I'll take a stab at it. First of all, we talk about a lot of terms. I don't really know what the definition of an assault weapon is because it's really a made-up term. It's a semi-automatic rifle is what I believe they're referring to. And so. It has a lot of plastic on it, and it makes it look cool, and it makes it look similar to the M4 that's, the military issued. But the weapon, or the AR-15, if they're referring to that, actually you see that handguns are often used by criminals more so than AR-15. So I don't think that AR-15s, there being more of them sold, or AK-47s or any other guns, because there's a wide variety of them. So I don't know necessarily what an assault weapon would be considered. But I see no law-abiding citizens. There are plenty of them that own AR-15s, and they're just because the gun looks scary doesn't mean that the gun's scary. We have people in this world that they're going to find a way to commit a crime. It's not the gun committing the crime, it's the person behind that gun. And I think that a lot of times when we get into this debate, it all of a sudden becomes about the gun when it should be about the person. And unfortunately, we have evil people, and if we take guns away, we're going to have evil people that do things with knives, or they're going to find other ways to make bombs like we saw in Texas. So I don't see blaming the gun when it comes to this issue.
And Jeff, just from a factual standpoint, we actually dug into that research as we prepared to vote on that bill, and the statistics say, I can't give you the exact statistics, but Chairman Oliva in his close on the bill as he presented it, shows that there's no higher incidence by so-called assault rifles versus handguns, and this has been debated too, but handguns used to be the demon because they were so concealable, and so that was always the gun that was the most vilified. Now the attention's turned toward the AR-15 and guns of similar nature, but just statistically, like that, we dug into that, and that was not. There was no statistical difference in the two.
Was the issue of bump stocks addressed this year?
It was in that bill. You guys might know more about the actual.
Yeah, it
bump
is
stocks.
included in the package, and I believe that what it says is that if you possess a bump stock on October 1st, I believe anybody who possesses a bump stock, automatically you become a felon by possession of that.
So it's against the law now to have a bump stock?
On October 1st. That portion of the law, the other portions of the law, the 18 to 21 and the 3-day wait, that went into effect immediately when it was signature by the governor. But the bump stock issue, I believe it's October 1st, it goes into effect.
And in case people don't understand exactly what a bump stock is, that basically allows a semi-automatic weapon to become an automatic weapon. Did I get that right? it's a device that allows that to happen, and it's been a much discussion not only in the state of Florida but around the nation as well. Was there also some money geared towards mental health, as I understand it, in that bill as well?
And this might have been, I think, what Senator Broxton was alluding to. When we talked about wanting to break that bill up into 3 parts. Most of the money I think that Senator Broxton referred to was toward a portion of the bill. There are essentially 3 portions. There was the portion that would allow the school marshal program. There was the mental health portion of the bill, and then the gun ban portion. And so all sides, I think, likely agreed that the middle portion of that bill, which is clearly needed to be done, was the school strengthening and hardening, the strengthening of the Baker Act, the sharing of information between agencies. No one would have fought that. And I think Senator Broxton was dead on when he said that we all would have preferred the bill to have been broken up into 3 parts, so we could have voted up or down on any of those 3, because I think that the middle portion we all would have agreed to. So yes, it did provide funding there, and that's something good that came out of the bill, was that middle portion that dealt with mental health funding, with hardening schools, with the strengthening of the Baker Act portion, things like that. So I know the other guys have something to add.
I'll just add that, and that was, as Representative Ingram talked about, is one of the strengths, recognizing that mental health is such a problem and getting worse. That was really solid in the bill, was addressing the part of mental health. The funding, we have 69 million that's going to go to the school districts statewide, which will allow them to have district employees that will focus on the mental health component. There's another 28 million or so that will go to counties around the state to help fund CAT teams and mobile crisis unit teams. The CAT teams will focus on that 11 to 21-year-old category of a young adult, young child, student that takes mental health folks into their world, hypothetically, works with them in their environment. When they become 22, they graduate them up, they work them through, and then of course the mobile crisis unit is what it says. It's a mobile unit that goes around. And so I felt that is a very effective tool to address a problem that we have, that couples the stuff that Representative Ingram and Senator Broxton talked about, is the school hardening, the intergovernmental coordination, and this is the mental health bucket of that. And I think that Governor Scott signed a bill that's going to be very effective in that regard.
One of the things, Jeff, that we know and we're seeing even in the last 8 years that Clay and I have served together is we're a changing society.
Mm-hmm.
Social media has changed the nature of how kids see themselves and how they communicate with others. We're seeing more mental illness. We're seeing more opiates and drug use that is more critical to their mental health. And we've got to deal with these issues. And the best place many times to do that is at school. But you do that through communication. You do that with students communicating with other students when they're seeing deviant behavior, and they're reporting that. This situation that happened should have never happened if the government would have done what they were supposed to do. We had sign after sign where this young man should have been Baker Act. He was not. And then we see these egregious, horrible things happen because we failed to recognize real mental illness and social differences. And if we can do that better, if we can get our teachers and our principals and our students and our parents involved in looking around, seeing what's going on, making sure that people that are having problems that we identify and get them mental services. And that's one of the things I think you'll see from this $500 million that we sent to the 67 districts.
Okay. I'm going to, one other question from a viewer here, and we've more or less covered it, but I'm just going to kind of, in case you want to add a little extra to it, he's basically asking the question, given that it is such a big deal, did in fact the legislature and Governor Scott act too hastily in passing the particular bill? I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I think, well, and I don't hate to cut you other guys off. I mean, whenever you do anything under the time pressure of a few days or a couple of weeks, that's going to go in the statute books, you tend to, let me put it this way, I think we could have and would have had a much better product if we had not tried to rush a bill through, no doubt about it.
And I would agree with that. That's kind of the stance that I took, because I can't really think of any time where any government entity rushed to a decision on a public policy and then it was a good thing. I think sometimes you have to back away from the situation, maybe use your head a little more than you use your heart, and you still need to use your heart, but just use your head and use facts more so to come up with a policy. And like Senator Broxton said earlier, there are a lot of good things in that bill. The mobile crisis, there were 13 mobile crisis teams across the state. We're adding 30 to that, $19 million worth, almost $100 million for school resource officers. So there's a lot of good things, but my trip was that 18 to 21 where I'm very convicted, where I took that oath of office to defend the Constitution for 18, 19, and 20-year-olds, just like I did for people over 21. So that was my big pushback on that bill. But there were a lot of things. We tried to get it split, like it's been said before. It just didn't happen, and the vote ended up the way that it did, and we'll move on from that, and we'll learn from it.
I want to get to some other topics, but I do just want to, you said the 18 to 21, so basically as it stands right now, this bill is going to be that if you're an 18-year-old, you will not be able to purchase a firearm. Is that correct?
Yeah,
That's correct.
For long guns, well, I mean, right now we already had it in place for handguns, not to cut you off. But it would move long guns, so shotguns and rifles from 18 to 21. There's a 3-day wait on long guns. Now, there are some exemptions in there with the military exemption, law enforcement exemption, which, you know, some people would argue that creates kind of
Equal protection.
Yeah, it's just we're going to have a military class that's treated differently than just somebody who doesn't go through the military. But my big trip was that 18 to 21 change.
Jeff, I know we got a lot of other stuff to cover, but like, you know,
this is an important issue.
Back to the underlying question that you asked about hastily getting something through. Senator Broxton brought this up. You know, just a 3 or 4 days delay in trying to roll a product out. In that 3 or 4 days between when the legislature announced that we were going to roll out a bill and when the bill was actually rolled out, the corruption in the sheriff's office and Sheriff Israel's you know, whatever was going on there to pad crime stats in order to get more federal money, all that stuff would have come out. Now, all that would have prevented the tragedy. Anyway, yeah. I mean, like to answer, I've already said it, but I mean, just even a handful of days would have made a difference. Much less if we had really put together a panel to study this and find where the faults lay, exactly what went wrong, and then address them point by point. Would have been a better product.
Is it possible next year this issue will be fine-tuned?
I think so. I think we're going to get some stats back on what's effective, and I think President Trump will probably speak to it more forcefully nationwide and give us a signal of what he thinks would be good for every state, so that when we go across state lines that we have some uniformity in what we do.
Okay, very good. Let's move on to some other topics here. What should families and communities do to increase the percentage of our children who enter kindergarten ready to learn? In other words, how do we better prepare our students heading into kindergarten?
Yep.
I mean, this year we put record funding into early learning, recognizing that as children come into the system, or the system's probably not the right word, but come into the school system to learn, and that helps them be better prepared, also recognizes some strengths and maybe some weaknesses perhaps. And so, first of all, it's recognizing that even young ones, even that age, can learn. They're not limited from that standpoint. That maybe they can't learn like someone older, obviously, but I was very proud of the legislature this year passing record funding from pre-K learning to help them transition into the K-12 system. And so very vital, very, very important, and we're seeing some great results.
Yeah, Jeff, and then to piggyback on that, you know, there are local initiatives, you know, the Studer Community Institute and some of the things they're doing with 30 million words and some of the initiatives they've taken to sort of take the problem on locally. You know, I guess it was session before last, we attempted to provide some state resources toward that end, but we weren't able to actually get it funded. But, you know, that's something in the future that the legislature can maybe continue to look at, attempting to fund some of the local initiatives as well.
Very good. Another viewer question here regarding schools. She says statewide charter schools and vouchers have been decreasing quality of education we can offer our students by siphoning off money from the public education system. According to her, she says studies show that outcomes from the charter students, with rare exceptions, are no better than in traditional public schools. Your thoughts on that?
I don't know where that study, where it's coming from. Obviously, it'd be good to see it. I mean, some of the studies I've shown have actually shown that some charter students are actually excelling some of the traditional public schools. And you mentioned some of the voucher things. I know this year one of the vouchers that we passed that I supported was an anti-bullying voucher. And some of the argument was, well, you're taking from some of the schools, but we're not. It actually was a tax credit that was funding it. that allow students that have been bullied to go to either another public school or to take a voucher and go to a private school, hypothetically. And also we further funded some of the Gardner scholarships as well as McKay, other voucher programs for the low income or special needs children. And so from that regard, getting them into whether it's a charter or another capacity has been a very beneficial thing that we're seeing tremendous results from some of these needs, and the students are taking advantage of the voucher. But in terms of the charter, I know in my school district we have one of the most recognized public school systems within Florida over in Okaloosa County, but also Liza Jackson is a high-performing charter school. So I've not seen studies that would show they're the same or less than. I've seen some studies. In fact, part of our bill we ran last year and enhanced some this year is taking high-performing charter schools and going into lower-performing school districts around the state and allowing them to come in to allow some of these students, because for me, as a parent of 3 children, who have all done public, private, and homeschooled, I'm a big believer in what's best for the student and for the family. And sometimes it is traditional public, sometimes it's a charter, sometimes it's private or homeschooled. And so for me, as a legislator, I want to try to find what's best for the student and the family and let the parents make the choice. But I have seen very good statistics about some of these high-performing charter that have a great track record that are doing pretty well. But statistically, I'm not refuting that. I just hadn't seen those statistics.
Jeff, I think you'll see the future legislative emphasis will be on high impact areas. I think there is a legitimate concern that many of our good students are leaving traditional school and going to charter schools. Mm-hmm. We need to emphasize the ones that are not doing well, that are stuck in schools that are low performing. And I believe you'll see the legislature begin to move to that matrix where we leave nobody behind. I mean, a person that is failing and ends up quitting school is frankly a burden to their family, to themselves, and to their potential. And we're going to do a better job at that. So if those people that are overly concerned, I think, about what's happening with charter schools, you're going to see there'll be more emphasis on high impact areas.
And to piggyback off that just a little bit, I mean, luckily we have great schools here in the Panhandle, and I was a product of the public school system, which could be a good thing or a bad thing, some people might say. But my children are going to go through public schools, so I certainly support public schools. But if you look across the state at some of the places where charter schools are really becoming prominent, and it's places where people are sending their kids to a F school year after year. No child should have to go to an F school year after year after year. We don't fight that here in the Panhandle, but they do in other parts of the state. So we have things in place where schools can come in, a charter school, where that child can get the education that they deserve. So I'm a supporter of public education, but I think, and charter schools are public schools. So I like to have that trip where if you're continually to send your child to an F school, get them out of that and get them a place where they can blossom.
Okay. Here's another education-related question from a viewer. The question is addressed to all of you regarding House Bill 7055. What is your response to public school teachers and parents who lobbied against HB 7055 because it decertifies only teachers' unions? No, according to the viewer, no other unions are affected, and takes money away from public schools and puts it toward charter schools. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think in theory, the bill simply did this. It says if a union's going to represent a school system, they should have a majority of the people that belong to that union. And that was the emphasis. That's what I heard. And that kind of makes common sense to me. I know that we're pretty close in the Panhandle to being, I believe, one school system's at 49%. It won't be difficult for them to get to 50, so they will not be decertified. But it has to do with parity. And I know there was a lot of resentment about that issue, but it's something that has been coming for quite a few years now.
Okay. I'll just jump into there. What Senator Broxton talked about is, House Bill 75, it did several things within that bill. One of them addressed the union question that Senator Broxton hit on, but also there was some concern last year. Even myself had some concern about the capital outlay dollars. There was, the traditional public versus charter, as Representative Williams talks about. The charter are actually public schools, but when it came to capital outlay, I felt the legislature did an outstanding job under Chair Diaz correcting that ship and saying that I think it's a $2.7 billion price tag on capital outlay, whereas last year some of that went to the charter school operation. all of that this year went to the traditional public schools. So we righted that ship. In addition, we gave the traditional public another $50 million for capital outlay. And we did say for charter, we gave them $150 million, which proportionally skews way back to the traditional public standpoint. In addition to that, we did a reading scholarship, which was desperately needed, especially in the K through 5 category, that we're given a tax credit for helping in a reading scholarship. We're giving the teacher classroom supplies, we upped that from $250 to $300 per teacher, which that was a concern because some teachers are coming out of pocket to do stuff in their classroom. I thought that was an extra benefit. And then as Representative Williamson hit on earlier, we did a principal autonomy program, which we actually work with some of the unions in South Florida, where you have a high performing principal in the public school system and maybe some lower performing schools within that district. You allow that principal to come and actually oversee more than one school. And so we did work more and more with some of the unions, with some of the people in South Florida to right the ship in that regard. So I felt all in all, 7055 did a very good job of furthering the purpose and call of educating our students, but also strengthening some of the pillars that made things great and correcting some of the things that maybe weren't so great.
Okay. Here's the one about sentencing juveniles to adult prison, and this comes from one of our viewers. She says Northwest Florida's First Judicial Circuit has the highest rate of using the adult criminal justice system, which focuses on punishment instead of rehabilitation for juvenile offenders. She goes on to say Florida has the highest rate in the country. 98% of these decisions are made by a system called direct file. She says done at the unfettered discretion of the state's attorney. Are you familiar with this regressive system, she asked, and what do you plan? Do you have any kind of plans to try to correct something along these lines?
Well, Senator Brandes carried a bill that would reform some of the things that we're doing in juvenile justice and really in other forms of justice that we've simply lost our way on. We have the ability to allow judges, they should be allowed to make decisions that are human decisions, not have so many mandates. But we're seeing across the state that many judges, their ability to look at the human circumstances is taken away from them by a previous legislative intent. So I know the report showed that there are certain counties in the Escambia that have higher juvenile detention in adult prisons, and we're going to have to look at that. I think they got the message. I think they saw the report, and I have confidence in the 3 sheriffs that I represent that they are very sensitive, very good people that want to make sure that we're doing it right.
Anyone else like to add to that? We had a huge amount of response on this next question. I think we had something like 300 emails about it. And it says, will each of you legislators pledge to work for government recognition of the Santa Rosa County Creek Indian Tribe?
I'll answer
You
that
wanna take
since
that?
that's right in my backyard,
Yep.
probably in the Shamuckla area. So that's something that I'm just really learning about this. I know there's some things that the federal government can do for recognition. There are also some things that the state government can do for recognition to the tribes. I believe they have some issue possibly with artifacts and different things that they have to be recognized to be able to take these artifacts and show them out in public. And what they want to do is they want to use those as pieces to really teach people about the history of Native Americans right there in our backyard in Santa Rosa County. So certainly to me, from a concept, I mean, I would love to work on something like that that would help a local group that does a lot of great things in the community. They hold festivals and do a lot of things to give back. But I haven't dived in enough and got back from the state what that process is, what it means, but I certainly will be looking forward to working on it. I've had some phone calls the last couple of weeks. Senator Broxton may know a little more than me about it because he's been around a little bit longer, but I'm certainly going to start looking into that and communicating with them, and hopefully we can get the ball rolling on something.
You want to add anything, Senator?
Well, we know the Creek Indians have been here a long time. I got a call during session that part of the subdivision I live in was set aside as a historical site. And I said, well, what, 1800s? No, BC. And we know it was probably a creek burial area. And we need to do a better job of making sure that we recognize that tribe. I think the Seminoles actually came from the Creek Indians. So we recognize them, and they do pretty well in the state of Florida, by the way.
Yeah. Well, we certainly appreciate their input, certainly their engagement of communicating with us this evening. Well, Representative Williamson, I believe this goes back into your backyard again here, talking about the Garcon Point Bridge. So a viewer asking the question, is it likely the Garcon Point Bridge will be transferred to the state of Florida?
So right now the Garcon Point Bridge will stay the way that it is. Senator Broxson had a bill in the Senate. I had one in the House. They kind of mirrored each other, and through the process, the Senate changed a little bit, the House changed a little bit. Got it through the committee process in the House, and kind of was waiting to put it onto the House floor. I know the Senate had worked through a couple committees and got held up in the last committee. So that's something that we'll have to probably jump on and continue to work on and look at all options on that, on the Garcon Point Bridge right now. It's not going to be taken over by the state. And the key thing that the senator and I worked on is whatever we were going to do, we were going to make sure that this thing was a sweetheart deal and a good deal for the taxpayers of the district and of the state of Florida. And no matter what happened in this, if the state would have taken it over, it would have been called a bailout. You could have paid $10 for that bridge and somebody would have said you bailed them out. But we wanted to make sure that we had something that was fiscally responsible, and tried to work through the process. It just didn't get across the finish line. I'm going to use this next year to try to do the best I can to educate myself on all options we have on that bridge. I know the senator's probably tired of working on it, and I've only spent the last 2 years working on it, and I'm getting close to being tired of working on it. But we'll keep all options will be on the table. We're going to have a new Speaker of the House. We're going to have a new governor. So who knows what the next governor is going to think about it compared to what the last two governors did. But we'll keep working on trying to have a resolution again that is a good deal for the taxpayers of the district, and that's a good deal for the taxpayers of the state of Florida.
You want to comment on it, Senator?
Well, I think there was some nervousness at the very end from the governor and some others about debt, and our bill required that the Turnpike Authority would issue secondary bonds to pay for it. That would be a much lower interest rate and theoretically would reduce the toll. Mm-hmm. That did not happen. Hopefully we will be able to meet with the trustee and some other folks and have a reasonable discussion on where we go from here. They're poised now to go to court. I think the attorneys in Tallahassee probably agree that if they go to court, they could impose the $5 toll, and we think that would be devastating to our economic area. That's the reason the governor opposed that almost 3 years ago. But there is a way. We don't know what it is. It's coming. We just wait to see what it looks like when it gets here.
Yeah, that's been a difficult challenge for quite a few years now. So, Northwest Florida. This is another viewer question. Northwest Florida, this person says, needs more people. We need folks who wish to contribute, who bring advanced knowledge/skills, as well as tradespeople and those willing to apply and learn. The 4-point immigration bill proposed in 2017 would accomplish much for Northwest Florida and the country. And he's saying accept DACA as a fact and develop a reasonable long-term path to permanent citizenship, eliminate extended family bypass, eliminate country quotas. In parentheses, he says we are open to the globe. And then D, substantially improve our border security so illegal people of any age cannot invade us. Why can't this happen now? The viewer asks.
We'll pass that along to Senator Rubio and Representative Gates, I guess, will be my answer.
Okay. Anybody else want to comment on that, or is that okay? Very good. Homeless veterans. Utah has made homelessness almost obsolete by providing housing. Some of the cities have converted old motels or other buildings into very low-rent housing. What plans does the Sunshine State have for reducing our homeless population, particularly for our veterans? That comes from a viewer.
This is not a comprehensive solution, but we've looked at, the state collects through the doc stamp process or tax charged to people as they purchase homes, collects money that goes into a trust fund for affordable housing. And so each year, a portion, I guess over the last 4 or 5 years, we've earmarked a portion of that money toward pilot programs around the state aimed at trying to eliminate the homelessness problem. And so the thought is, let's try, rather than trying to come up with a solution that we think works, force it on everybody statewide, to come up with some regional solutions and fund them out of that trust fund. So the hope is that one of those pilots will be effective enough for us to do on a larger scale, and then we do have at least a dedicated trust fund to pay for those pilot projects, and then maybe some larger scale ways to go about things. But homelessness plays. I mean, it's not necessarily just a problem of homelessness. There's addiction and economic circumstances. There's so many things that plays into people becoming homeless that treating that immediate problem is treating a symptom and maybe not treating the problem that causes people to become homeless. So I think the other thing is we want to look at the causes, not just the symptoms, but we are putting resources toward trying to address those symptoms as well.
And as I understand it too, that kind of plays back to a lot of mental health issues, as I think research and statistics will show.
Part of the frustration for Florida, all the other states, is how big of the pie do we take over? We have appears to be a very dysfunctional federal VA program that many times these veterans are lost in the system. They become discouraged. They're not able to get adequate care or have long waiting periods. And we could take a more active role in that, but they're spending billions, and we don't have billions. Mm-hmm. We have millions. So the best thing that can happen to the veterans is to join with the states, let us run these programs, let us take those money and deal with people at the level that we know where they're at in the 67 counties that we represent. If we could do that, not only with that program, but many programs, I think you'll find a more functional way to deal with these veterans because we know where they are, we know what they're doing, and we can be more effective in treating them.
Jeff, we do fund some things like veterans courts and drug courts, which are creative ways to recognize that when someone enters the criminal justice system that they are a veteran, that they've probably done and seen things that the rest of us can't imagine they've had to deal with, and treat them with kid gloves as they go through the criminal justice system and maybe prevent them from getting in the situation of being homeless at some point.
Okay. Here's a viewer question concerning a hip roof. She says, my 1940s home has a hip roof, but according to the new law, I no longer qualify for hip roof insurance deduction. Why were we not grandfathered in? And is that...
those type questions that are new to us. I mean, we'd like to, probably if you would call one of us, we could get hold of the insurance department and find out what's going on. The first thing you said, built in the 1940s, probably presents some issues there. But I know hip roofs that are built in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s do get a discount. So there must be a factor there that maybe she is not aware of that we could help her with. Okay,
so she could give one of you a call and you could do a little further research on that. Let me backtrack just a little bit more, just simply because we are getting a fair amount of questions coming into me since the broadcast has started on guns again. And so I know we covered that for a great deal in the beginning of the program, but let me just touch on a couple since we're getting so many. And it primarily revolves around the question of assault rifle. And so I'm getting questions like, why would anyone need an assault rifle, assault weapons? Why did you not ban assault weapons? That type of thing. So let's go back on that one more time on the whole assault weapons. And I think probably what they're referring to is like you were talking about the AR-15s sure. and things of that nature. So one more time, let's address the assault rifle issue, if you will.
I mean, so you look at the AR-15, and I guess that's what they're considering an assault rifle. It's a semi-automatic gun, just like your hunting rifles. Sometimes they have clips that are larger. People on farms, people that have issues with hogs and with coyotes and different things often do use guns with larger clip size, especially farmers that have the coyotes that are taking chickens and different things like that. But you ask the question, why do you need an assault rifle? Why do you need a car that drives over 80? Speed limit's 80, or speed limit's 70. Why do we need alcohol? Why do we need any of the things that we have? That car that drives over 70 kills a whole lot more people than guns in our country. And so you can ask the question, why do you need this? Why do we need a lot of things that we need? But why should, because somebody who had a mental disability, they were not stable, and that the sheriff and there was every breakdown you could imagine in the system that person was able to do what they did. But why should me as a law-abiding citizen not be able to have something that maybe I enjoy going to the range and shooting? So it was the Bill of Rights, it was not the Bill of Needs.
Let me also point out too, and just so it might clarify, just on definition standpoint, the Florida legislature did make it illegal to have bump stocks, which would in fact allow those weapons to become fully automatic. Am I correct in that? So if that,
I don't know a lot about bump stocks. I mean, I think that I heard that I know that they can it allows you to fire more rapidly.
Right.
It was used in the Las Vegas shooting.
Right.
I believe the concept originally was to help people who had physical handicaps to be able to fire a weapon, but it can be used, but I don't know anything about them. I don't really care anything about bump stocks, but I mean, I don't think that something that you could purchase legally just automatically on a day, you should become a felon. Right. If we wanted to do something where, like the Class 3 guns that you have to register and classify, you have classifications where the government has to know that you have that Class 3 permit and you own that. Maybe we do something where they register those, but I really don't like that you automatically become a felon on a date certain because you owned something or bought something when it was legal to buy. But to be honest with you, I'm not an expert on bump stocks. Don't have one, never will have one, don't want to have one. But
right.
Jeff, I'm hesitant to jump into this, but I think it's important that there are an example of a legitimate reason to have an AR-15. Our region, when a horrific hurricane hits, our state really in general, this is a real world example I can think of. If someone comes who haven't had power for a week or 2 weeks and someone comes to loot my property, I want as many rounds as I can have in the magazine, and I want to be able to protect my life, property, and family. And I think that's a scenario where a weapon like that gives you the greatest chance to protect your life and liberty.
Okay. Let's move on to infrastructure. It says, while we are benefiting from the 3-mile bridge replacement project, there is much more to do throughout Florida and the rest of the country. This particular viewer says the Eisenhower Interstate Highway System, the nation's electrical grid, the federal government software systems are either out of date today or will be during this decade. He says, let's get to work using public and private dollars and create and pass comprehensive infrastructure bill. Why can't we do this? And of course, I know a lot of that's done on the federal level, but let's talk about it on the state level. What can be done?
We obviously partner with the federal government, when the funding, look, and I think that'll happen. I mean, you've seen the president announce trillions, or at least $1 trillion in infrastructure investment. So I think that what the viewer described is going to happen. The state of Florida, when the dollars come for projects here, will be a partner. FDOT will be a partner with regard to, the building of the highways or refurbishment of the highways and bridges. The private sector, the viewer talked about that. A lot of you have probably seen, the satellite program that will, from pure private sector investment, create probably a Wi-Fi system globally that won't require us to have to worry about where we are and having a Wi-Fi signal any longer. So I think that's going to happen. I don't think that's far-fetched what the viewer talked about at all. I think that's coming.
I think we have to be careful that when we look at the nation that we're not saying Florida. If you look at Florida, and we all travel the state, we're in pretty good shape as far as roads. You go from Key West to Petito Key, and our quality of roads are phenomenal. FDOT does a great job in making sure they identify those areas that we need to do immediate resurfacing or new construction. We have a massive amount of projects going on in the Panhandle. In fact, a lot of our fellow legislators accuse us of getting too much this way, but I think that people want to see the state, they got to come through Pensacola, and we want them to make sure they have good roadways.
Okay.
Just to piggyback on real quick, Jeff, just one thing they were talking about, and one of the questions, the points of the viewer's question was infrastructure. And one of the things I think we need to be thinking of is I met with someone today at lunch, and we were talking about as a region, as different pockets within the region, a lot of times we just do just enough to get through today and not as much planning for 5 and 10 years from now. And so I think of things like cable and high-speed cable and internet. If we want to really continue to separate Northwest Florida and position us to diversify, those pockets where we want to say military's one, tourism's two, but from a business and economic perspective, there's other facets that we can add a third, fourth, or fifth leg to the stool. We should be thinking forward thinking, not just for today, but 5, 10 years from now for our children when they get older, what are they going to step into? And really do public-private, bring people to the table that we can really put the right pieces in place so that Northwest Florida is a real participant in tomorrow's technology and future.
And I think a key thing we can do for the future too is we can make sure that we protect the Transportation Trust Fund. Because that's where the money that's going into these projects for work plan and different things, we need to make sure that it's funded to its full amount. I know that we've had more funding in the last few years than we did, say, 10 years ago, but we're still not to that level that we were 10 or 15 years ago from a percentage standpoint of money. We need to make sure that we don't use that trust fund for other things, because that money is being raised by your gas taxes and by other things, and it needs to go right back into those roads. And I can't really speak for the other ones, but I guarantee you everybody up here is very pro infrastructure. And when you drive across the state, you could probably go to any town and people are going to complain about their roads, but we really do have good infrastructure and good roads, but it doesn't mean they can't be better. And I look forward to trying to protect that over the next few years, and I'm sure my colleagues will as well.
Okay, very good. Here's a question about cable television. The viewer says currently cable television is not regulated by anyone. Fort Walton Beach City Manager informed me that the city's agreement with Cox Communications expired several years ago. He said the state is developing some sort of regulatory system. And he says my bill includes a broadcast surcharge that is up to $7.50 per month and a $5 regional sports charge. Aren't those basic businesses of cable TV? How can it be an add-on if it's your normal job? So you want to address that?
I know this much about that, and I do know that when the telecom dereg came, I think there was a big 1986 dereg, and then one that came maybe a decade later. That there probably is some ambiguity with regard to regulation of cable. I'm not familiar enough with it to be able to help. So maybe that might be a scenario where, like the senator mentioned, that please call us and maybe we could delve in deeper and gather facts.
Florida really has very little to do with the cable contracts. It's an FCC issue.
It's federal dereg.
That's
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And a lot of the packaging happens that are simply thrust on to the cable companies that happen someplace else, and they have to bear the bad news to the customer that you have a rate increase. It really was not created by them. It's created by the packaging of these different networks. So we're seeing some changes in that, and the market is changing it. And hopefully that's going to be continued, and people's rates will go down rather than going up.
Yeah, market forces are probably going to make a big difference in that in the coming years. Here's a question. So this is kind of one of those why are we even talking about this? But I don't know. But the viewer sent it in to us. It's kind of fun to talk about. So a little light, I guess, if you will. We'll talk about daylight savings time. The viewer said, what was the rationale behind the decision to change Florida's time zone? But we did not do that. That's not exactly what happened. I think what he is saying is talking about daylight savings time year-round. So what's the deal?
Probably the biggest, it's something I wouldn't mind having daylight, that extra hour or so of daylight in the afternoon. But the tourism industry originally is the, group that wanted, decades ago to us to expand the daylight savings time scenario. So anyway, that's the biggest beneficiary are, the parks and Central Florida and that sort of thing. Obviously, beaches here benefit from that. But I think if you had to point to a beneficiary or a reason it's probably been pushed, that'd probably be it. But that's probably not the only reason.
I mean, from a personal standpoint, I don't like coming home at 4:45 and it being dark. So it would be nice in the wintertime for it to be light, where you can spend a little time with your children. But also, it's going to take an act of Congress for this to even happen, because the federal government still has to act on it.
Right.
And a lot of people were concerned about the difference in time if we did this in Alabama, but we've heard that Alabama may be looking at trying to do the same thing as well. And I think we'll see other states jump on that. But I would love to have that extra hour of sunlight there in the evening 6 months out of the year.
Me, not so much, because it gives me an excuse not to have to do yard work. It's dark. I can't cut the grass, right? So we're getting short on time. So here's one just kind of for fun. The viewer sends this in. It says, if a candidate from another party wins the gubernatorial election next year, who would you prefer it to be? If you take a look at the Democratic side, all of you are Republicans here. You take a look at the Democratic side, any particular person you'd like to work with over the other one?
That sounds so dangerous. I'll tell you this as a funny anecdote to I guess kind of goes toward it. The house that Representative Williamson rents with some other guys is in Tallahassee is one that I lived in previous sessions. And we got junk mail one day, and we were going through the junk mail, and Gwen Graham apparently lived in that same house at some point. So anyway, we've got a connection to her, if nothing else.
So maybe Gwen. You know, you think about it, her father was a rather popular governor here in the state of Florida. Anyway, well, thank you all so very much. I have about 4 minutes left, and I want to get each of you to kind of just recap the 2018 session and kind of what we're looking for as we roll into the next year. But Representative Ingram, let me start with you, and let me congratulate you first and foremost on a very successful career in the House of Representatives. And you've always been a gentleman and a professional, and we appreciate all the times that you have taken your time to come in here and participate in this forum, and we've always enjoyed having you. So again, congratulations on your career. And before I get you just to sort of recap that, what do you, quickly, plans for the future?
Yeah, I'll thank you for everything, Jeff. It's been a pleasure working with you and WSRE. But my day job is at the Chamber of Commerce here in Pensacola. I love that job. It's very similar in nature to what we work on in the legislature, trying to grow the economy. So I'm passionate about that and look forward to being there full time, after November.
Very good. In about 30 seconds, I'll just get each one of you just kind of give me a highlight of 2018 and what you're looking forward to as we move forward.
I'll recap. I'll say this if you let me do that in lieu of that. Just thank you to the people of District 1 that elected me, my family, Leslie, my wife, and kids, Maddie and Lydia, for putting up with me being gone. And then again to WSRE and you, Jeff, for always being so gracious and allowing me to be here with you every year.
Sounds great. Senator Broxson, 30 seconds.
Well, it's been an honor to serve with Clay. He is a gentleman and a fine man, good family man, great Pensacolian. We've been very fortunate to be involved with Republicans primarily. That's worked with a Republican governor. We have a unique situation, and Governor Scott came in from the business community with one thing on his mind, and that was to add more jobs. And we've done that. And this state stands out among all the states as one that took a bad economy, turned it around, and here we are 8 years later with a great story to tell.
In about 30 seconds,
Sure.
Representative Wynn.
Thank you to the people of District 3, but I want to say thank you to this guy right here, Clay Ingram. He has been one of the absolute best friends that I've ever had in my life. And instantly, whenever Representative Ponder and I went to Tallahassee, we had a little bit of clout, and it was because people trusted and loved this guy so much. They know that whatever he says he's going to do, and they felt, well, if the other guys from the Panhandle are like that, then they're going to be just fine. He doesn't go around and boast about the things that he's done, but Clay Ingram has a legacy that is going to last much longer than just when his term's up here in a few months. It's going to last years and years, and he's not going to brag about it, but I'm going to sure as heck brag about it for him. He's done a great job over there, and we couldn't have done what we did the last 2 years without him. So thank you, Clay.
Get about 30 seconds, Representative
And same thing,
Ponder.
WSRE, thank you, Jeff. Thank you also. And it's kind of hard not to find something amazing to say about Clay Ingram. He's been more than a friend. He's been like a father figure to us coming up because of his mentorship, his maturity, his wisdom, his understanding. Because he loves his Lord, he loves his wife, he loves his family, and he's just been a gift to Northwest Florida. And I hope that his district as well as Northwest Florida will continue to celebrate him. But his friendship, I was just even saying earlier to him, I said he's going to really be missed because us in the back look up front and see he's always there, and it gives us some security that hey, all is well. So it's been a real blessing to serve with you, Clay, and so we're truly going to miss you. And I do want to thank the constituents of District 4 to allow me to serve as well.
I heard he was going to be the long snapper for the Miami Dolphins.
Come on, somebody, let's go.
Thank you so very much for joining us. We certainly appreciate all of our viewers and constituents for sending in the emails and making the phone calls. Had some great questions this evening. Our guests have been members of the Northwest Florida Legislative Delegation, Senator Doug Broxson and Representatives Clay Ingram, J.R. Williamson, and Mel Ponder. Tonight's broadcast has come to you from the Phyllis and Mike Johnson studio over the television airways of WSRE Television, PBS for the Gulf Coast, and News Radio 1620 and 92.3 FM. This program will be available soon online at WSRE.org and also on YouTube. Please feel free to share. I'm Jeff Weeks. Thank you so very much for watching. I hope you have a great spring and summer and enjoy all that the sunshine state of Florida has to offer. Good night, everyone.